Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. It's been a while since we've done a video, but we're going to be back at it. We got a whole lot to talk about in this video. However, we're going to do a full 7-round mock draft. We're not going to do any trades, but full 7-round mock draft for the San Francisco 49ers. There is a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any time. Let's jump right in. Alrighty, so let's kick off this mock draft. Round 3, pick number 99 overall. I have the 49ers taking edge player Byron Young out of Tennessee. He's 6'3", 243. He is a senior, and when you look at what he's done recently in the combine, he's definitely shot up draft boards. I think initially he was maybe pegged as like a 5th round guy. I'm not even sure if he'll be here for the 49ers in the 3rd round at this spot. He's moving up. Yeah, great performance in the combine. He's got that excellent burst, really flexible, hyper competitive, which you love at that position. You know, if you're an edge player, there's a lot of times in the game you're going to get beat, but you just have to keep that competitiveness going. And he's got that high motor, which is really great size, you know, and I think developing, you know, under a guy like Chris Kasarik, practicing with guys like Nick Bosa will really help him out. I think the one kind of detriment for a guy like Byron Young is probably his age. He's already going to be 25 years old come the start of the season. However, I do think that he's a great fit for this defense. You look at some of his numbers from last year: 7 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and just what they're looking for, a guy opposite Bosa. And that's why a number of years ago we traded for D Ford. We were looking for that, you know, just that burst, that great speed off the edge from the other side to really complement Bosa. And I think Byron Young has a good chance to be that guy. I think at least he'll be a rotational guy moving forward. Now with the next pick in the 3rd round, which would be 100 overall, I do have the 49ers taking safety Jay Ward out of LSU. To me, Jay Ward, very similar name to Jimmy Ward, and I think they have a pretty similar play style, both very fiery, both very competitive, you know, both very violent. You see a lot of big hits from Jimmy Ward, and I think Jay Ward is the same kind of guy. They also have a lot of versatility. You know, Jimmy Ward can play safety. We saw him play in the nickel last year, and I think you'll see Jay Ward maybe do some of that as well. I think ideally he would be more the long-term answer at safety. I think if we can bring back Gibson for a year, Jay Ward would benefit hugely from that, being able to kind of sit and learn for his first year, and then maybe 2024 he can come on, be a starter. You know, a similar kind of career trajectory to a guy like Talanoa Hufanga, for example. But Jay Ward, a couple of things. Well, the big thing that's really holding him back, a little bit tightness, so I don't think that in straight up man-to-man coverage he will be super good, but I think, you know, if you give him like a space to work in, he's really instinctive. But the other thing too, which really he needs to do, is to bulk up. He's 6'1", 180. If you look at any 49er safety, they're always going to be at least 200 pounds. So that's where he's going to have to work out a little bit, but I think it'll be a great fit here, and it fills a need too. With the last pick in the 3rd round, which I have it as 101 overall, Niners going to take defensive tackle Zacch Pickens out of South Carolina, 6'4", 305 senior. This guy, you gotta love him. He's another just high motor guy, loves to play the game of football, and at defensive tackle is actually pretty solid at getting after the passer. You know, if you look at some of his things where he maybe struggles with, I think it is, yeah, taking on those double teams. He's not going to be the guy to necessarily hold his ground, which you would like out of a defensive tackle, and that's what we're hoping a guy like Javon Kinlaw can develop into that. But overall, look, he's still a little bit raw in terms of moves. He can definitely develop some more moves. However, you can't deny his athleticism, his competitiveness, and I think he is someone who has that really good size for what we look for and would be a huge benefit to the defensive line. And similarly, you know, we just need depth right there. You know, Kinlaw, you can't really count on him to be out on the field, and outside of Eric Armstead, there are a lot of question marks there. So I think Zacch Pickens can come in and he can be a contributor, not only in the short term, but I think he could actually be a very solid long-term option for the 49ers. Alrighty guys, let's move on to our 5th round picks. We of course don't have any 4th round picks. One of those went to Carolina for Christian McCaffrey, but in the 5th round we have 3 picks here. The first one at 157 overall, I'm going to look at Kei-Trel Clark, the cornerback out of Louisville. He's 5'10", 180. He's actually a junior. What I love about a guy like Kei-Trel Clark is his versatility, and I think that's something that the 49ers really covet in their players when we look to draft guys. You know, he's one of those guys where, again, very versatile, played outside, played inside at Louisville, probably played a little bit better on the outside, although he did have a lot more reps there. But I think he's someone where, depending on where we feel like needs are, we could look to develop him on the outside, or he could be maybe a guy to look at on the inside as well. My opinion is that probably a guy like Sammy Womack is the initial starter in 2023 at the nickel, but a guy like Kei-Trel Clark, and it's always so important to have that versatility. You know, we of any team know that injuries are just a huge part of the game, and if you can have a guy who can play multiple positions, well, that potentially saves a roster spot to keep another key player on the team. So I think Kei-Trel Clark is a good fit here for how he plays the game. Super instinctive, which is such a huge thing, especially when you play a good amount of zone coverage, but just in general, being able to play in the secondary, you got to be instinctive. I think the big things in terms of just concerns, he had an injury, torn ACL in 2021, and then also just the size as well, 5'10", 180. You'd like to see him bulk up a little bit more, but I think this would be a very solid pick for depth in the 5th round. Now, moving on after that, and because of Robbie Gould's announcement, we now have a big hole at kicker, and I'm going to fill that need right here with a guy, Jake Moody, kicker out of Michigan. Some people are talking about him maybe going in the 3rd round. I think that would be a little bit too rich, but I think it'd be a great pick here in the 5th round. Of course, it fills a need. When I kind of looked into some of his numbers, I think they're very solid numbers for a kicker. You look at 2021, converted 92% of his kicks. Last season, 83%. So overall, the last 2 years, about 87% conversion rate. He did have some struggles on the road last season, which is a little bit interesting. Only 5 for 9 last season on the road. From 50 plus yards in the last 2 years, he's only 4 for 8, so 50%, which is not awful, but also, it's not great either. But here's the thing. He did have a 59-yard field goal kick last season, which is just incredible. And just to have that range. And of course, I think he's a guy who could just, on kickoffs, kick the ball out of the end zone. That's all I want from you on special teams. But I think it'd be a very solid pick, fills a big need, and of course it allows us to get much cheaper at that position. Now, with our 3rd and final pick in the 5th round, I'm going to take Blake Freeland, the offensive tackle out of BYU. When you look at him, he's a monster of a guy. He's 6'8", huge, 305, and very similar in terms of a guy like Mike McGlinchey, who, of course, in this situation, he could potentially be replacing. He's also a senior. When you look at him, again, I think it's a fair comparison. I think he's maybe like a younger, lower version maybe of a guy like Mike McGlinchey, but really great in terms of run blocking. He's got that really good size. He is very athletic. We saw him in the combine have a really good performance there. He definitely will need some work in terms of pass protection, footwork, hand placement, things like that definitely can be refined. But I mean, when you're looking at a 5th round pick for offensive, on the offensive line, there's of course going to be a number of things to look at. But the Niners, and actually last year I was a little bit surprised, shown that we're not afraid to start, mid to late round picks on the offensive line. You look at Spencer Burford, Aaron Banks still very young, so I think Freeland has a shot to start at right tackle, but I think you'd probably give the edge to either McKivitz or to a guy like Jalen Moore. But for the long term, I think it'd be a really good move. The one thing which another maybe slight concern is just that he's so tall, 6'8", that it could be a little bit of a liability when it comes to leverage when pass rushers are coming after our quarterback. But I do think in the 5th round, this would be excellent value there for the 49ers. And again, we do need some depth on the offensive line. In the 6th round, I'm going to have the San Francisco 49ers taking linebacker Cam Jones out of Indiana. And here's a guy who is really just the epitome of what 49ers look for in linebackers. And we've, of course, had a lot of success drafting linebackers in the middle to late rounds in recent years. So Cam Jones, former defensive back, which is almost a prerequisite to be a 49ers linebacker. But look, you're super explosive, high character. He's a guy where he's going to be an absolute leader in the locker room, whether initially it's going to be maybe a special teams leader along with a guy like Oren Burks and George Odom, but he's someone who just fits the exact mold of what the Niners look for. He does, and he has struggled a little bit in terms of pass defense, but his run defense is really good, and you would think that maybe in his rookie year that's where he's going to be seeing a lot of his time. Maybe he's that 3rd linebacker on your base down, so there will be some pass defense to do, but I think it'd be a little bit more coming in for run defense. He did have an injury in 2022, missed the second half of the season. There was a foot injury, but he's really just he'll be good to go for sure for this season. And the other real kind of knock on him is the fact that he just, needs a little bit more experience in pass defense. But this is a guy who I think we can develop, maybe, similar. I think it might be a little bit too much pressure to say he'll be in the next Dre Greenlaw, but I think he could maybe get there, or even a guy similar to like an Aziz Al-Shire. But love this character, love this guy, love the way he plays the game. And when you see him on tape at Indiana, you're thinking, this is a 49ers linebacker if I've ever seen one. So I'd be really happy to bring in Cam Jones. Of course, Aziz Al-Shire is very, very likely to leave in free agency. So bringing in a guy like Cam Jones, having, Fred Warner to look up to, having Dre Greenlaw to look up to, Oren Burks, maybe bringing back Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, that really rounds out the linebacker group in a good way. Moving on to the 7th round, and the 49ers, we have 3 picks in the 7th round. And for the first pick in the 7th round, I'm going to have the 49ers taking a tight end. It's going to be Brayden Willis out of Oklahoma. Now, when you look at this guy, 6'4", 234, he's a senior. This size is maybe a little bit smaller than what we would typically go for. A guy like George Kittle, a little bit bigger. But when you watch Brayden Willis play, I think that he is similar to Cam Jones at linebacker. I think Brayden Willis is quite similar in terms of he's like a 49ers tight end. You look at his numbers, he had 7 touchdowns last year, 513 receiving yards at Oklahoma, so really solid numbers right there. What I like too is he's athletic. Similar to Kittle, he just fights for yards. He is not afraid to knock through guys, really, really use his size, use his athleticism to either go around guys or just to go right through them. You'll see him fight for yards, which you really need at the tight end position. So many times it's maybe 3rd and 4 and you need to eke out those 1 or 2 more yards to get the first down. He's the guy to do that. When it comes to blocking, he's very willing. He's a trier. I think, of course, he's going to have some room to work, room to develop. I think maybe in the weight room he'll be able to bulk up a little bit, but the fact that he really tries so hard in the blocking game is such a huge thing, whereas you do see a lot of tight ends who just maybe don't work on that part of their game as much, but if he wants to play in the 49ers, he's got to block, and I think you love to see that he's such a willing blocker right there. Of course, the other little knock on him is probably that he's a little undersized, but I do think that he'll be able to. In the 7th round, I think this is great value for the 49ers. Now, with our second pick in the 7th round, I'm going to have us taking Dante Stills, the defensive tackle out of West Virginia, and he's 6'4", 285. He's actually a graduate, so he's definitely been in college for a little while, but he's someone who I think he could maybe potentially replace a guy like Kevin Givens down the road. I think he plays a similar game. You love to see the first step, the burst, the explosiveness, the athleticism. When you watch him, those are all his things where he kind of gets by in college on a lot of those things, just pure athleticism. But he has 53 career tackles for loss, which is insane. So you can see that backs up the fact that he can penetrate the offensive line, get back in there and be disruptive. And just that quickness, which not only can, for in terms of like pass rushing, but you can also see him like chase down running backs, which is a huge thing at defensive tackle. Of course, he's a little bit undersized at 285, and his strength and moves definitely need some work, refinement, but we're talking about a 7th round pick, so that's to be expected. And I think, of course, he's a different player to DJ Jones, but I think he could potentially have a DJ Jones type impact. Maybe we don't see too much of him in his rookie year, but I think maybe year 3 or so he could really be an impact guy. And that's what you're looking for in the 7th round. You're looking for athleticism, you're looking for specific traits. He has those, and then you look to develop wherever there's maybe concerns or weaknesses, you want to develop those. And I think the 49ers would love to have him. We've actually met with Dante Stills too, so definitely shows some level of interest the 49ers have in him. Now, with the last pick in the draft for the 49ers, the 3rd pick of the 7th round, I'm going to have us taking Isaiah McGuire, the edge player out of Missouri. He's 6'4", 272. He's a senior now. He's someone that the 49ers have also met with, and when I look at this guy, you love the size, 272 at defensive end. If we can't bring back a Charlie Omenihu, then he definitely has that similar size. I think the 49ers will absolutely look to re-sign Charlie Omenihu, and then you could have a guy like Isaiah McGuire as kind of like a primary backup to him or to play a similar role. Now, I guess in terms of a concern, is he going to fall into that Solomon Thomas type of category where do you have him on the outside, on the inside? here's the thing, in the 7th round, I'm absolutely willing to take a guy who is, highly competitive, and that's so important on the defensive line. He's got power, he's got some moves, he's got some really nice traits. You can develop him, and I think you'd see maybe 2-3 years down the road working with a guy like Chris Kasarik and all those talented guys on the defensive line, that I think you might see him just be able to, like basically unleash his full potential. And I think here it would be really good value. I think in some ways he needs to get stronger. He needs to play with maybe a little bit more, just be a little bit more instinctive, and maybe he's a little bit of an overthinker, and that allows him to basically puts him like a step behind the play. But give him some time, give him some good coaching, and he's got traits to develop into a very solid, at least rotational guy down the road. So that's going to do it, guys, for my 7-round mock draft. Just before we finish up, I'm going to go over a couple of guys who I think we should target as priority undrafted free agents. I'm going to go through just a couple of guys who I think we could target as priority undrafted free agents. We're going to look at 2 positions that we didn't address in the draft. Number 1 is quarterback. I think you could look at a guy like Stetson Bennett. Of course, we know him out of Georgia. Won the national championship game, and he's someone who is already pretty old. I think he's 25. There are memes online about that. But I think someone who's obviously played a lot of football in college, and this would be a guy typically just to bring in for camp, just to be another arm, simply because I doubt Brock Purdy's going to be throwing much in camp. Most likely we'll bring in a veteran quarterback too. But a guy like Stetson Bennett, or another guy from Purdue, Aiden O'Connell, I think these are guys who could, maybe there's some qualities we like about them. Of course, we saw what happened with Brock Purdy last year. If we can keep one of these guys maybe on the practice squad to develop, and who knows, maybe they could be a long-term decent backup option. But those are a couple of quarterbacks I'm looking at to take after the draft. Then the other positions really are the interior offensive line. TJ Bass out of Oregon, and then I'm looking at a guy like Ricky Stromberg out of Arkansas. Ricky's probably going to get drafted somewhere, but then again, you never know. Last year, if you told me that Alec Lindstrom and Donovan West, centers, were not going to get drafted, I would have said you're crazy. So you just never know, but I think the Niners will also target a couple of these guys on the interior just to even have competition in camp. I do think the Niners are very high on Nick Zacch, on Jason Poe, a lot on the interior, along with Banks and Burford, of course, but it's always good to have competition, and you just never know when one of these guys who can just develop into a really good player. So there you have it, guys. That's my 7-round mock draft. That is my couple of undrafted free agents that I think we should look at. Let me know your thoughts on this mock draft in the comments below. I know it's been a long time since I've done videos. Of course, any of you guys who've checked out my latest videos have seen that, a lot of big changes going on. But thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do leave your thoughts again in the comments, or maybe make some of your own suggestions. I'm always open to that. But appreciate you guys for being here. And before I head out, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.